What old movie had the most impressive compositing, the most rotoscoping? This one is a contender. When the Cat Comes, also known as the Cassandra Cat, is a Czech movie from 1963. It has a somewhat simple story at its core. It isn't a simple movie at all, but it revolves around a parable about a cat who wears sunglasses. When someone takes the glasses off the cat, everything the cat sees becomes colored by its inner disposition, every one the cat sees. Lovers are red, jealous people are yellow, I think. I forget the other colors. It's not totally obvious which is which. Surely the red people could also be angry. The crux of the parable is that the villagers, after becoming colorful, well, some remain gray, the villagers, after seeing the truth, after being exposed, they chase down the cat, capture it, and kill it. Don't worry, I didn't just spoil the movie, because we first hear this parable in full at the beginning of the film, when a sailor tells of his travels. Just a few minutes later, a circus rolls into town, and would you believe it, with them is a cat with glasses. This is a live-action movie with a live-action cat. It isn't anthropomorphized, it can't talk. They really put glasses on a cat. And maybe this is animal cruelty, but I gotta say, the cat looks pretty cool. They also really color all the people. Well, actually, they don't. Well, they use some practical effects, but also a lot of old-school compositing to put together phantasmagorical scenes where everybody is a different color. This movie has other things going for it, but these scenes are one of the big attractions. The effects aren't exactly realistic, partly because the concept is inherently unrealistic, and partly because it does look a bit old, it does look a bit mechanical. The film was lovingly restored a few years ago, and it looks great, but it's still clear that they were working with somewhat limited technology. To me, that's not really a downside, though. I don't think the point is to make something deeply convincing. Again, people, they don't really change color. What stood out to me was the style and the ambition of the movie and the fun of it all. This isn't a real definition, but to me, a classic movie is a movie that in some ways goes for it. I don't mean classic like classic Hollywood, but just a movie that is a classic, is a movie in some ways that goes for it. And this movie definitely goes for the proverbial it. When the Cat Comes is not all fun and games, though. The parable that I described earlier, it's a bit grim. They kill the cat after all. You can probably see how that story might have been a salient metaphor behind the Iron Curtain. It's a story of someone who can reveal who the scoundrels are. And it turns out that this person, well, this cat, who can see the truth, is a huge danger to society and has to be eliminated. You suspect that this story might not really be about a cat. One thing that is kind of conspicuous in this movie is how much time we spend at a school. Even before the movie really starts, the opening credits have an entry for a bunch of children. So you can suspect from early on that this movie may be alluding to something generational, to the next generation. The main character, besides the cat, of course, is a teacher named Robert, who is kind of the odd man out at his school. The headmaster seems to have an iron grip over the faculty. It's a bureaucratic sort of thing, and he insists that everything goes a certain way. At one point, he insists that there's only one version of the truth, which happens to be the one he sees. The school is an ordered place. The hallway has a tiled line down the middle of it. Actually, the school is best known for its taxidermy collection, which is sort of wonderfully macabre. Apparently, it's a big part of the curriculum. Robert prefers to have his students make art. This tension in the academy, the cronyism, the bureaucracy from the headmaster, reminds me of a movie I saw just a few weeks ago. Yes, it was about cats. It's called Cat City. That also has traces of a corrupt government running through it. Cat City also straddles the line between kids' movie and something else. I haven't really talked about the tone of the Cassandra Cat yet, but it is sort of a kids' movie. It might be more accurate to say that it's sort of a family movie. It has that feeling of a family movie, but it also has unmistakable political undertones. I think this is a pretty common pattern for films, for the subversive films of the Iron Curtain, where you could not necessarily come out and say exactly what was on your mind at all times. There are a number of things that make the tone of this movie somewhat unorthodox, which for me is a good thing. One of my favorite things about watching far-flung movies like this is that they usually taste a bit different, and the Cassandra Cat is certainly in that category. The movie opens up with a man opening up a small hatch on the front of a clock tower and looking out at the world and at the camera, looking at us. He might seem a bit like Father Time, but actually it's Uncle Oliva, who acts a bit as the narrator for this movie. I said Robert was the main character, but you might argue that Oliva and his strange twin are really at the center. Oliva introduces the film, which makes things feel a little bit like a fairy tale. Next, we go to the top of this clock tower where Uncle Oliva surveys the town through a little telescope. This is our introduction to the beautiful town of Telch, where the movie was filmed. This film has a lot of quirks in its style. While this scene is kind of a nod to Rear Window, we also throw in some unexpected angles. Uncle Oliva's able to communicate with some of the people down on the ground, even at a somewhat unrealistic distance. It's a nice little vignette. The movie doesn't really carry this all the way through like something like Rear Window does. And in fact, many of the characters we meet at the beginning aren't even particularly significant later in the movie. Some of them are. This is a quirky sort of film, which may or may not be a good thing. I think the movie takes a little longer than expected, maybe, to find its conflict or even to find its major characters. You might say that it's a bit aimless at first, but the quirks make this enjoyable, I think. Even before you realize what the movie is going to be about, it's engaging enough. One thing that might make the movie a little bit harder to read is that the protagonist, Robert, is not particularly heroic. I'm not sure if his understated demeanor is a cultural thing, if he's supposed to be an every man. I'm not sure. Either way, the movie isn't too hard to follow. Pretty straightforward, but it might feel a little bit aimless, especially towards the beginning. I do want to mention one other interesting thing about this movie. Again, it's sort of a way that it reminds me of Cat City. In the video about that movie, I talked about how Cat City participates in global cinema, how it participates. Since that movie is a spoof, it has a fairly well-defined relationship with cinema, with other movies. That isn't really the case here. To me, this movie didn't really seem like other movies, except the Rear Window scene, I guess. Maybe the closest thing I can even think of is the movie Celine and Julie Go Boating. I reviewed that on this channel, but that movie is 10 years newer than this one, and it's not really that similar. Anyway, even though it's hard to see direct relationships between this movie and other ones, I think that this movie is still really actively participating in cinema in an interesting way. I guess you might say that every movie is, but here it feels a little bit conspicuous. I guess the most noticeable part of this is the special effects scenes. They're ambitious. They're also directly manipulating the image. They feel kind of connected to Hollywood spectacles, but also like something all of their own. And this ambition, this taking sort of simple techniques and taking them a long way and doing something pretty interesting with them, there's something endearing about that, and you wonder about how that functions as a national statement to some degree. And this is what I mean in that this movie is sort of participating in cinema in a particular way that I think is somewhat common for movies from a similar time and place. Anyway, might be a bit too vague. Who knows? Overall, I think When the Cat Comes is a lot less famous than it should be. If you like interesting international movies, you should watch this one. Maybe it's a bit aimless at the beginning, but by the end, it's a pretty stirring story about confronting authoritarianism with art, something that perhaps the film itself is doing. On the Tobin rating scale, I would have to give this one a strong 16. Before we leave, I want to mention briefly why I chose to undertake this series of 5 cat films, this feline anthology. There's no reason for it, really. Well, there's no reason that I chose cats over any other animal or any other subject, but I liked the idea of combing through films on a different axis, I guess. Usually people follow genres or movies, genres or actors, or eras or ideas to find the next thing they want to watch. I have a sprawling network of interests, and most things that I watch plug into it somewhere. I think that's probably true for most people. But I guess when you pick something a little more arbitrary, like cats, you get a different kind of tour of this ridiculously diverse medium. I always think it's kind of funny that movies are just called movies. We only have one word. Well, 2 words. Well, 3 words. We only have one concept for this entire medium, which is so varied. When you pick a subject like this, you're touring through things in a different way. Granted, these movies aren't exactly random. All of them piqued my interest, but they were also all very different. There's some similarities. We had 2 Eastern European movies. We had 2 animated movies, 2 movies vaguely about women's empowerment, 2 movies grappling with the counterculture. There were some similarities, and yet the cats in all these movies played different roles, and the movies themselves were quite different. I thought I might be wrapping up with some kind of summary of cat tropes, the sly cat, for instance, or whatever Catwoman is. But these movies didn't really converge to anything on that front, so I don't have much to conclude with other than saying that it might be a fun exercise for you to pick sort of a random theme and just find a far-flung set of films that are vaguely related to it and watch them. Next week, we will begin our series on capybara. If you know any movies about the largest rodent, let me know so I can check them out.